Bakhmut appears to have fallen into Russian hands. But is the head of the Wagner group playing both sides to make sure that he comes out on top? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's May 21st, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. But as always, guys, if you notice that there's a lot of clickbait and hyperbole, especially in the national security news space, that's why I launched the Strategic Sitrep. This is a once-a-week newsletter with the 3 to 5 news stories that you need to know about this week, with none of the clickbait, none of the hyperbole, just straight news and honest assessment about what matters and what doesn't. So sign up for free at strategicsitrep.com/subscribe or at the link in the description. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what exactly has happened. So the best reporting does indicate that Russia has surged its forces and functionally they have taken the last of the contested areas around Bakhmut. I think it's fair to say there's not really any parts of the city that remain outside of Russian control. But as you can see, the areas, the flanks around Bakhmut remain fairly contested. Ukraine has pushed back in either direction, even as they've allowed Russia to come forward in Bakhmut. And we've talked about this before, that this is a very, very dangerous way to take an objective. And politically, Russia has to take Bakhmut so they can have some victory to show the propagandists at home and for the generals to show the Kremlin that they have, in fact, achieved something. But the primary fighting in urban Bakhmut has been done mostly by the Wagner group, and that's where things get kind of interesting, right? So when I want to point this out, I will call out poor decision making on either side, and I think the Ukrainian spin machine is not spinning this the way they should. As you guys can see, Zelensky denying that Ukrainian city is occupied by Russian forces as of just yesterday, and then hours later he says Bakhmut's only in our hearts after Ukraine loses control of the city. And so this is one of those things that it looks bad when you appear to deny factual realities. And it's easier, right, in the U.S. And in a lot of NATO countries. Instead, we focus on facts that are true. And we, avoid facts that are uncomfortable. That's sort of how the Western spin machine works. Instead, the more you lean into Russian style denial of truth or creating false realities, the Moskva was sunk by someone smoking a cigarette too close to a cruise missile. Like, okay, sure, guys, right? It makes sure you can only run those lies so many times before your fundamental credibility is diminished. And Russia certainly is speedrunning that, but you can see what the result is. The Russian public has an extreme distrust. They are doing everything they can to avoid serving in this conflict. And Ukraine has not come anywhere close to Russian levels of deception. But when you see stories like these two juxtaposed, you are sort of stuck. It also damages their credibility. But let's talk about what exactly Wagner Group is doing here. Now, here's the interesting part. Prigozhin has declared victory in Bakhmut city on May 20th, and then announced his intent to withdraw from the city May 25th, claiming that Wagner has achieved their penultimate objective. He said Wagner forces will conduct an operational pause, resting and restoring combat power at field training camps in unspecified areas, presumably far from the front line. There's no geolocated footage confirming that this is happening, but Ukrainian officials say that Ukrainian forces are still fighting in a small portion of Bakhmut. But this is why I also can't stand Institute for the Study of War. Like, it's symbolic, even if true, That's a nonsense headline. I understand what they're sort of trying to say, which is Bakhmut has not been a city of substantial strategic value for a long time. And as I've talked about on this channel, it hasn't been a substantially important city for either side. And it's sort of been questionable. I've questioned Ukraine's fixation on defending it. Russia, of course, committing a huge mistake by fixating on seizing it, but that doesn't mean that Ukraine has any obligation to double down on Russia's mistake. But here's how I think Prigozhin is trying to play the Kremlin. The Wagner Group, right, has achieved its operational objectives. This is noteworthy because in the last basically 6 months, no Russian Ministry of Defense force has achieved any of its operational objectives. Volodar, you get to see, not 1 square foot of Volodar has fallen into Russian hands. It's been a humiliating series of losses for the Russian naval infantry units. You can see Crimean alignment. Russia has made virtually no advances. You could see just marginal changes to the front line as we go back further and further and further. You could see we're talking, they're measured in feet per day. Just comically small advances. Really, call them advances as being generous. They're repositioning of forces, basically. And no one, there's been no operational success by the Russian Ministry of Defense, except in Bakhmut, where Wagner Group has achieved all of Russia's gains, basically, in their offensive. And in that context, right, Wagner now, though, they probably have exhausted their combat power. And what they don't want to do is become used by the Russian Ministry of Defense as an instrument. Prigozhin doesn't want his elite fighting forces to just become attrited to nothing, right? He's just used by the Kremlin and left with no Wagner troops left. So what he is saying is unilaterally, he's saying, I have achieved this considerable objective. I'm the only one to do so. He's also got this problem. His forces are ground out, and the flanks are collapsing around him. These flanks, by the way, defended by the Russian elite VDV. So the fact that they are being broken up as much as they are is kind of embarrassing for the Russian MOD. And so then Wagner risks having its own forces annihilated in Bakhmut because the VDV can't hold the line. So what is Wagner going to do? He's going to declare victory, and then he's going to go home. He's going to get out of Dodge. And here's the best part. If Bakhmut holds, he gets to plant the flag and say Wagner troops took Bakhmut. But if Bakhmut falls, if the Ukrainian military conducts their pincer operation and forces the Russian forces to withdraw from Bakhmut, Prigozhin is going to sit there and go, listen, when I left you guys for 2 weeks, and you had a fully intact Bakhmut. It's not intact, but you know what I mean. A fully controlled Bakhmut. Wagner pulled out, and immediately there was chaos. And he'll go, it's because the Russian MOD is terrible at their job. It's because Wagner is run so much better, and it's going to be used as a massive propaganda talking point for him. But here's the reality. It doesn't matter who's there, because ultimately these flanks are not that well defended. They appear to be steadily being attrited and pushed backward. And at some point, there will probably have to be a decision made by the Russian MOD of whether or not they're going to abandon the city. And so Prigozhin is just like recognizing that that the battle for Bakhmut is at a strange moment. This is probably the high watermark of the Russian advance in and around the city. And so I'm trying to think of like a World War II analogy. This isn't really that common, to quit while you're ahead, so to speak. It's like a boxer who is they're undefeated because they've beaten a bunch of cans, right? They're at the peak of their hype. Everyone's talking about them. And then they sign a bout with a real boxer. And at that moment, that apex of their career, they're like, you know what? I'm retiring. I got hurt in training, and I'm retiring from boxing. You're like, well, you retired just as your career was getting difficult, when you were going to start really having some challenges. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Now that some of the better trained, better equipped Ukrainian brigades have come to relieve the TDF forces, the Wagner group's dipping. So yeah, it's true. You're right. Russia controls Bakhmut, but the situation is not great for Russia. Like, don't kid yourself. I think things are going to get worse for Russia before they have any chance of getting better. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for today. Certainly an interesting update, to be sure. Of course, I would be remiss to not thank the members of combatvetnews.com, especially our colonel tier members. Thank you guys so much. And our numerous lieutenant tier members. I appreciate you guys. Really, the folks at combatvetnews.com are the ones who really make it possible for me to do this. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one.